People always ask how I balance my family life with 400 shows a year. I'm just doing what I love with the people I love. It's my magic life.
I like Wes Iseli. I like everything about him.
On today's episode, we have a behavior expert in Alzheimer's disease and other related dementia. She has been a community counselor for senior care facilities, a trainer, speaker, a private advisor, helping thousands of families and caregivers understanding the daunting challenges of brain disease for over 25 years, and she even holds a degree in human behavior. Everybody, it's Lisa Skinner. Woo! Hey, Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
How was that introduction? I stepped on my tongue a little bit. Was that okay?
It was perfect.
All right, perfect. So we wanted you on the podcast because we have Alzheimer's in both sides of our family. Being a magician, you get hired to do rehab centers, nursing homes, things like that. We have experiences. I have a story I want to tell you about that. But I don't know. It affects us personally. I know it's in your family history, and we just want to know more about it and see where this goes, because I think it could be pretty interesting today. So, how'd you get started in this line of work?
You know, it was one of those situations where I just kind of followed the yellow brick road, and it's where the path led me. But my very first experience with Alzheimer's disease was with my grandmother. I was about 15 years old, and she started displaying some very strange behaviors. She didn't live very far from us, so I saw her pretty regularly. And I went over to her house, and she started talking about these birds that were living in her mattress, and they would come out at night and peck her face. And then she went on to talk about the rats that she saw running along her walls, and insisted that men were trying to break into her house to harm her, and they were coming in and stealing her jewelry. And the thing that made this situation so unique for me and had a lasting impact on me just through today was when she was calling the police 3, 4, 5 times a day, reporting all these stories. And a few times they went out to respond to her calls and, of course, didn't find anything. And they finally tracked my mother down and told her, you need to do something with your mother. She is a nut. And we can't keep using our resources every time she calls with one of these made-up stories. And I was there when they called her a nut, and I really was just so upset about that, because I knew my grandmother wasn't a nut. She was the sweetest lady on the planet, and she had something wrong with her, and they just weren't understanding that. And so when I decided to get my degree in college, I took a class in human behavior, and I was absolutely fascinated by the topic, and really kind of dived into what makes people tick. Why do people behave the way they do? How is it that certain personalities and behaviors emerge in certain type of environments and settings? So when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with that degree, I ended up seeing an ad in a paper for a community counselor working with families to assess the family members for placement in assisted living and memory care if they had a brain disease like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or one of the other ones that cause dementia. And I thought I would be really appropriate for the job because of my grandmother's experience, and I really that really touched me to the core with that situation. And that's kind of what got me started, and I have now had a 25-plus year career helping families understand the day-to-day challenges that they're faced when having a loved one with dementia. And since my grandmother's experience, I have had 7 more family members suffer from one of the brain diseases that causes dementia. And like you said, it ends up that it does run in my family because 5 of those family members are blood relatives, and 3 of them were through marriage. So I've had the experience not only as a professional counselor, but also I know what it's like to walk in these shoes, and I think it really gives me a special understanding of what the family members are going through, and I'm really committed to helping them because it's a very tragic illness, and it lasts a long time. The average person lives with it from 8 to 15 years, and the thing that's so difficult about it is there's so many different behaviors that are associated with brain disease, and you just honestly never know what's going to come up on a minute-to-minute or day-to-day basis. So that's what I strive to help people with, is being able to focus on quality time spent with their loved one instead of the stress and anxiety that a lot of the symptoms bring on in the family dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, I got so many questions. I'm just bubbling with questions here. So, that cop, how many people in the world are like that cop? I'm that way with drugs. I can be out with friends and they're like, that girl is methed out of her head. How do you know that? Can you tell what kind of drug a person's on because they're acting weird, or, cocaine or something? I don't do drugs, so I don't know these symptoms. So to be able to be a cop and assess this situation, she's a nut. Well, no, it's more than that, buddy. You got to dig down deep a little bit more. But I don't know. I would be like the cop. I would say that lady's crazy. She's just something's wrong.
Well, that seems to be the stigma that still goes along with Alzheimer's disease and the other brain diseases that cause dementia. And by the way, there are over 100 brain diseases that cause dementia. And when I use the term dementia, I'm referring to the symptoms and behaviors that are associated with it. So just to kind of wrap your head around what I'm trying to explain is, we've all had a cold at some point in our life, and when we're, calling our boss and saying, I can't come into work today because I have a fever and I've got aches and pains, and, you're describing your symptoms. You're not just saying, oh, I have a cold. You basically, everybody says, I have a sore throat or whatever the symptoms are. So in perspective, when you're describing the symptoms of brain disease, that all falls into the bucket of dementia. So dementia is not a specific disease. And there are so many of them. So when you say dementia, it could be any one of probably several hundred symptoms. And not everybody experiences the disease, which one of them happens to be Alzheimer's, and that's the most common one. Everybody experiences it differently. So some people have hallucinations. My grandmother did. She had delusions. She had the paranoia. She was suspicious of people. Some people have horrible outbursts of anger. The symptoms vary from case to case, from person to person, but all of those behaviors and symptoms that we see associated with a brain disease are all what is under the umbrella of the term dementia, if that hopefully makes sense to you.
So how do you, just curious, how do you know, so is that sort of the beginning thing? Because I've always heard people say, well, they have dementia and that might go into Alzheimer's. So I always assumed, well, you get dementia first and then you get Alzheimer's is just way worse. You're not remembering your loved ones anymore or anything else. Is that how it works? That you start out with dementia and then you get into you're classified with the worst disease or whatever? Or is that just explained to me wrong?
No, that's a great question. And I think that the reason why people describe that is because they think dementia and Alzheimer's disease are two different diseases.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know of anybody that has ever had Alzheimer's disease that didn't have dementia. But there are lots of people who have Parkinson's disease without the dementia. So that's one brain disease that you can have with dementia or without dementia.
You're getting me. You're getting me all fired up about that. I want to ask you about Parkinson's, but keep going.
So Michael J. Fox is the perfect example of a person who's been living with Parkinson's disease for 30 years now, but he does not have dementia. So what that means is it has not affected his brain. His brain is not going through the changes that other diseases that cause dementia, like Alzheimer's, causes. So his mind is fine. There's another brain disease called Huntington's disease that people get dementia or not. My brother-in-law had Huntington's disease, but he did not have the dementia accompany that disease. His mind was fine. So, again, the proper explanation or definition of dementia is it really refers to the symptoms that accompany a lot of the brain diseases, but it is not a separate disease. It's more like a syndrome. It's the symptoms.
Oh.
So you don't get dementia first and then it turns into Alzheimer's. You get Alzheimer's disease, which is the brain disease, and
that causes dementia.
One disease, and it causes dementia.
Gotcha.
Because of the changes going on in the brain.
Okay.
So my dad had Parkinson's. And I just turned 44. My dad was diagnosed, I think, at 44 years old. At the time, he was the youngest person in Virginia. Nationally, I have no idea. But, I mean, all the hospitals around here, it can't be Parkinson's. You're too young. And he had hallucinations, but we always thought it was the medicine because he was on all this experimental medication. And I didn't know that that was part of it. I didn't know that that was a... They blamed everything on his medicine. So... I didn't know.
Actually, one of the hallmarks of Parkinson's disease are hallucinations, but not everybody who has Parkinson's disease experiences the hallucinations.
Wow,
so
I had no idea.
Some people get them and some people don't get them.
I came home from college one day, and my neighbor said, "You need to go check on your dad." And Dad was in his boxers, walking at the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and asking if anybody had seen Wesley. He called me Wesley when I was a little boy. And he thought I was like 5 years old and he couldn't find me. And he was looking all over the house for me. And the neighbors were like, "You need to check on your dad." Yeah. And we gave him whatever medicine that knocks him out. And he went to sleep and woke up and he was fine. But that's what we did. I mean, that's the doctors told us, if he hallucinates, give him this. And if he does this, give him this. And if he can't go to the bathroom, give him this. And it was just load him with pills. That's all they did. But I didn't know the hallucinations are part of Parkinson's. That's fascinating.
They are. And kind of just to piggyback on your earlier question, in the 45 years that it's been since my grandmother started displaying these very odd behaviors, and it turns out they called it senile dementia back then. They didn't even use the term Alzheimer's, although Alzheimer's disease was named back at the turn of the century. But in my grandmother's time that she was displaying the symptoms, a lot of doctors referred to as senile dementia, and it basically was kind of connotated to be an old person's disease. You get it when you're old. And in the 45 years that it's been since my grandmother had it, and she lived with it for 20 years, I haven't honestly seen a whole lot change as far as people's perception of it, people's idea about it, their paradigm about it, people's attitudes about it. We still have a lot of work to do there, and there's definitely a negative stigma attached to having the disease, and people aren't really that willing to talk about it because there's a lot of negativity attached to it. But I think because the numbers are increasing so significantly, especially the projection of people that will develop Alzheimer's disease worldwide in the next 25 to 30 years, the numbers are projected to double in that period of time.
Whoa.
And so I really think it's important that we raise awareness about this disease and help people have a much better understanding of it, because I've had people just in recent years tell me that their mom's a nut or their dad's a nut or their aunt's a nut because they suffer from this disease, and they just assume that they have mental illness. This is not a mental illness. This is brain disease, and it causes changes in the brain. And unfortunately, the changes in the brain brings out different personalities and different behaviors that people, I think, and this is just based on my experience over 25 plus years, they're not really that aware that this is the disease. It's all part of the disease.
Right.
So Natalie on her mom's mom and dad, that side of the family, her grandpa had Alzheimer's.
On my mom's side, yeah.
And on her dad's side, it was her grandma.
My grandmommy and my great aunt both had
Okay.
it.
But I don't know about your great aunt,
Yeah.
but your grandfather on your mom's side and your grandmother on your dad's side,
Right.
they both just went inside. They just became a shell of a person. They
Yes.
were just a shadow that would follow you around. You fed them, you helped them to the bathroom.
They're very quiet.
Is that common, or is that not so common? Just becoming a shell. Not screaming about hallucinations, not misremembering or acting out. They just went into themselves. They went into themselves.
I mean, from the very beginning through the entire disease, they withdrew.
No, it got worse. So I mean, it started, obviously forgetting things, and my grandpa just got
Quiet.
He
just
was very
didn't talk
quiet,
anymore.
and he'd get teary eyed every once in a while, and you go up and talk to him and remind him who you were, and towards the end he'd just get teary eyed because he couldn't remember you, I think. But he would just sort of look at you, and they both kind of just sort of mumbled a couple things that you couldn't understand, and then that's it. And they were like that for a long time. And my papa you had to keep an eye on him because he'd start wandering. He would get outside the house and just go, and you'd be like,
Right.
"Oh no, where's Papa?"
Well, both
So-
of those behavioral changes are common with Alzheimer's disease. One of the things that we see happen to people is they withdraw socially because they're not comfortable in social situations because of their cognitive impairment. Wandering is a very common behavior, and it's also a very dangerous behavior, especially if the person lives at home and they can just walk out of their house and then all of a sudden, on the turn of a dime, forget who they are, where they live, and they don't know where they are. That's happened to several of my family members, my grandmother being one of them. She got in her car one day because she was still living at home. This was, when she was calling the police. And she got in her car one day to go to the grocery store. And she got partially there. And she thought she had pulled into the grocery store parking lot, which she hadn't. She actually ended up just stopping her car in the middle of a 2-lane road.
Oh no.
And just got out and was wandering around aimlessly trying to find the entrance to the store, and she wasn't even anywhere near the store.
Oh my
But
gosh.
she could not, and I can tell you a bazillion stories that are very similar to that. So there's definitely a lot of dangers that people put themselves in harm's way when they think they're fine. They walk somewhere and then they just all of a sudden can't remember. That's like their short-term memory just completely short circuits out, and they can't remember who they are or where they're supposed to go, or they think they're pulling their car into a parking lot and they just stopped it right in the middle of the road. So there's a lot of situations that the person could really be putting themselves in harm's way when they have this disease, because at any given moment, at any given time, that short-term memory could just, it's like a switch that just goes off, and they can't remember who they are, or where they are, or how to tell anybody, how to contact a relative or a neighbor, and it's very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Goodness.
So I told you my dad had Parkinson's. He had the hallucinations. He died when I was 25. My mom, about, 6 years ago.
She died in 2018.
Yeah, but about 6 years ago, she started doing weird things.
Oh.
And off and on.
When I met you, there was some weird things going on.
Okay, so there you go.
When I met you, but
So that's 15 years ago.
Probably all connected, but who knows?
But anyway, she ended up having Lewy body dementia.
Oh.
And that
one also causes hallucinations. That's a tough one.
So she had an incident where there was, they say that's what Robin Williams had, and he committed suicide.
That's correct.
Now, was that because of the Lewy body dementia? Did that cause depression? Do we know? Is there research on that? Or was there other stuff involved?
It does. Well, any of the brain diseases that cause dementia doesn't necessarily cause depression, but that's one of the consequences of the disease is it's very common to see people develop depression, be depressed. Now, from what I understand of Robin Williams, and he was from Napa, he had a home here, he became very, very, very depressed. He suffered from tremendous depression, but at the time, I don't think he realized that he had Lewy body dementia, and he had a very difficult time overcoming his depression, and it really bothered him. And then finally he was diagnosed with the Lewy body dementia, and I think he educated himself on what that meant for the rest of his life, and it was a fate that he wasn't really willing to accept for himself, and therefore made the decision not to continue his life. But it wasn't necessarily the dementia that drove him to the suicide. It was the realization of what his life was going to be like, and that wasn't okay with him.
So,
but yes, he did suffer from severe severe depression.
So where I'm going with that is my mom stabbed herself in the neck.
Oh my goodness.
We think. We don't know.
Oh.
She was during a spell. It was during one of these hallucination spells or whatever. And my mom was a nurse. If she wanted to take herself out, she could take herself out. She knows how.
Yeah.
And she was on her hands and knees. Her head was in the refrigerator, and I don't know if the knife was in her neck or not. But she missed her jugular and stabbed herself in the throat. And she was scratching at it with her fingernails, saying that when my brother found her and said that, what's underneath your fingernails, she said, that's dirt. I was digging in the garden. And she was in the refrigerator looking for something when he found her. And it didn't make sense. We were like, what is going on? I was accusing her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was known to be abusive to his former wife, so I just figured he did it.
He wasn't very nice to her either.
He wasn't very nice to her either, so I just figured he did it. But then after Lewy body and everything, that's what I was wondering about Robin Williams. Could it have been during one of these crazy spells, he cooks up this idea that he just wasn't in his right brain, and this other side takes over. But when you snap out of it, Mom had great days, great weeks, great months after that incident. So, which could have taken her out in a heartbeat?
Well,
I guess we'll never know.
From what I know about Robin Williams' situation, because it was kind of,
okay,
close to home, the whole situation. This was a well thought out plan. He planned that event.
Okay.
He put a lot of thought and before he did it, he made sure that all the I's and T's were dotted on his will, and he definitely planned it.
Okay, all right.
It wasn't an impulsive thing that he all of a sudden was having an episode of, a Lewy body hallucination, or
people coming through the window, so I better take myself out before they torture me or something. Yeah.
It was a well thought out plan, and because it happened so close to where I actually am.
Right.
There was a lot of press about it and a lot of information disclosed. So that's my understanding, that he made sure all his finances and affairs were in order, and the kids, his children, were going to be well taken care of, and he had all his I's dotted and his T's crossed, and it had been planned out. He even was sleeping in a different bedroom so his wife would not catch him in the act, basically. She wouldn't discover it until later, and that was, I think, on purpose too. So yeah, but
wow. All right.
It simply is not out of the realm of possibility for somebody to harm themselves. It happens, all the time when they are experiencing this disease. So I don't know that that's the case for Robin Williams, but it certainly could have been the case for your mom, or other people that that are having false beliefs, or they think that somebody is trying to harm them, because all of these are such common behaviors with brain disease. False beliefs is a very common behavior, where you think that, one of the common ones is you might think that your spouse is still alive waiting for you at home, and you need to get to them as soon as you can, but they've really passed on like years earlier.
Yeah.
That's very common, is to believe your spouse is still alive.
My dad would hide money, like in the sock drawer, and like bury it and then forget where he put it. He nailed our windows shut in our house. I mean, just paranoia.
Yep.
Yeah.
My grandma did that too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Goodness. Well, I don't know if you have an answer for this, but as far as, on each side, at least one grandparent had Alzheimer's on my family. So how,
Natalie's worried she's going to get it.
No, what I'm saying is, how likely is it that my parents are going to get it? And then, at that, it's on both sides of my family, so I feel like I'm like doomed to get it. Is that how it goes? There just runs in the family, or?
You're not doomed to get it, but this is how it works.
Okay.
It does tend to run in families. So I, like you, are a high risk in that situation, because I've had 5 of my blood relatives, and they're all on my mother's side of the family. But she didn't have it. So this is kind of how the risk factors work. There are many risk factors that increase a person's chances of developing Alzheimer's disease. There are several that are modifiable or manageable, and then there are several that are not. The number one cause, or risk factor, I should say, of developing Alzheimer's disease is age. That is a non-modifiable risk factor. We can't do a darn thing about aging. And this disease typically shows up in people over the age of 65. And then every 5 years after the age of 65, your chances increase that much more of developing it. So you can't do anything about the age risk factor. The second highest risk factor is being female. Many more females develop Alzheimer's disease than males, and scientists or the medical community isn't 100% sure why that is. They think it might have to do with the fact that women live longer, but it definitely is a risk factor. And of course, Natalie, you and I can't do anything about that. So
she just threw her hands in the air when you said that.
That's another risk factor that is definitely not in our favor. So we've got the age and the gender, non-modifiable. But there are a lot of risk factors that are manageable or modifiable. The next highest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease is cardiovascular disease, and which is manageable through medications and diet and exercise and things like that. So what I'm saying is the more risk factors that you have stacked against you, the higher the risk is of you developing it. So you have to kind of take a look at the overall picture and know which risk factors apply to you. Do you have cardiovascular disease? Do you have diabetes? Do you have sleep apnea? All of these are risk factors. But even if you have these conditions, if they're being managed, then it'll kind of negate that from being stacked against you.
Okay. Natalie just whispered to me she needs to go work out now.
Yeah, I gotta go work out.
Yeah. Lifestyle. They have done many studies over the last several decades that your lifestyle can lower your risk factor. So if you follow more of a Mediterranean type diet with, eating leaner meats and fish and more vegetables and less simple carbohydrates like potatoes and white rice and white bread and things like that, that lowers your risk factor. Exercise lowers your risk factor. Exercising your brain, like learning a foreign language or learning a musical instrument or doing puzzles, those lifestyle changes can all lower your risk of developing Alzheimer's. Even if you start doing it at 20 years old or 30 years old, it will help lower your risk for when you are in your 60s and 70s and 80s. So, and then it tends to run in families. So that definitely is stacked against me, being female, being, my age, and, any other risk factors that apply to me would just add on to that risk of developing it. So
we need a treadmill with a puzzle table attached.
Right, there you go.
Well, there are
those walking desks
that we all can do.
There you go.
That, now, on a positive note, even if you have, a myriad of risk factors that are stacked against you and you feel like maybe it means you are doomed for developing Alzheimer's, that's not necessarily true. I have seen many people who you would think have all these risk factors stacked against them and they live their life just fine with no cognitive impairment. And then I have seen healthy people with high educations that have really, exercised their brain to the fullest extent who have developed it. So it seems like it might even be kind of just luck of the draw kind of thing, but there are definitely risk factors that you can manage that will help lower your risk. So kind of just to put it in perspective, my grandmother had it, and two of her sisters have developed Alzheimer's disease. My mother did not. She, right up until the day she died, she was as sharp as a tack. And, it obviously runs in her family because two of her sisters and her mother developed it. So, I don't know if she ever, her two younger sisters hadn't developed it yet before she died. But, I'm thinking as part of that bloodline that, I'm doomed to get it because look at how many people on my mother's side of the family. But I also know enough to know that it doesn't necessarily mean that I will get it. It can skip me very easily. Now, the one type of Alzheimer's disease that we know is genetic. So there's a difference between being genetic and running in families. Running in families just means that it's kind of uncommonly shows up with many members in the same family.
Okay.
But genetic means you actually carry a gene to develop it. And there is a type of Alzheimer's disease that's called early onset Alzheimer's disease. And that is a genetic disease that you carry a gene. But even if you carry the gene, and there are tests to determine if a person does carry that gene, that still doesn't mean that you're going to get it. I think it's about a 50% chance that if you carry that gene, you will develop it. And the difference between early onset Alzheimer's disease and the common Alzheimer's disease is the age at which you develop it. So 65 and older is typically the common form of Alzheimer's disease. It's the one that most people that we hear of have. And then the early onset can show up in people any age under the age of 65. I have known of cases where it was diagnosed as early as 30 years old.
Oh, gosh.
Man.
Oh, gosh.
The symptoms are the same. The behaviors are similar, but it's really the onset of the disease, the age onset of the disease that really distinguishes between
And once
the two.
again, if they're hallucinating, you're going to think they're on drugs because they're 30 years old.
Right.
You're going to think they're just a nut. I mean, they're 30 years old. It doesn't make sense. It can't be Alzheimer's.
Yeah. That's
wow.
Because you see somebody 30 years old that's behaving that way, you're going to think that they have a mental illness, schizophrenia, or they're on drugs, they're hooked on opioids.
Right.
It could be any number of explanations, but you probably aren't thinking they have dementia.
Right. Goodness gracious, I couldn't imagine. So you were talking about, doing puzzles and things. You see all these apps on your phone for games and they say improve your memory, work out your brain. Do those things really work? Is that something that I should load my phone up with and play those games? Or is it more just doing the exercise and
I'm not good at math.
all?
I'm not doing Sudoku.
Right.
Well, I have actually seen that that's recommended many places, like on the internet or on well, that Sudoku is one of the puzzles that is recommended. Anything that makes your brain fire up the neurons to have to think is what's recommended.
Okay.
To keep your brain exercised. It's just like any other parts of our body. If we don't exercise our muscles, they atrophy. And what Alzheimer's disease does end up doing is it causes our brains to atrophy. So the more stimulation we can give it and the more, keeping it in shape, so to speak, will lessen the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Or even if you have it, it can help delay the progression of it.
This may be stupid or, just the same thing over and over again, but I love to read. Is reading something that works your brain fairly well, or you need something more intense?
I think it really depends on what it is you're reading.
My Superman comics probably don't do it.
If you're reading the dictionary, I would say that would definitely apply, because you're reading the definitions of words and you are processing that in your mind. But if you're reading something that's not causing your mind to have to process the information, it probably wouldn't be as beneficial.
Okay.
But that's why they're recommending that, puzzles are good, crossword puzzles,
right,
because you actually have to think about what the answer is and go through a process to come up with the correct answer to fit into the puzzle. And like learning a musical instrument, your brain really has to work hard to figure that out. It's not an easy process.
Right.
Learning a foreign language, you're using different parts of your brain. You have to translate words from one language to another. So you kind of see where I'm going with this.
Yes, yeah.
Well, she also homeschools our 9-year-old daughter, so she's saying, you know, I'm learning about these civilizations I didn't learn about in school, and I have to learn it first to teach her and make her understand, and then test her on it. That's making her really fire up.
That's all, you know, those are perfect exercises for you to be doing to keep your brain sharp.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good. I want to try anything and everything I can.
So there's a Alzheimer's story I want to ask you about. And plus, I'm extra paranoid right now because I found out during this podcast that both my mom and dad had dementia. So you think it ran on your grandparents' side. That's directly my mom and dad.
Yeah.
So we were at a nursing home show years ago. I mean, it might have been when Natalie and I first started dating. And after the event, I didn't even have Lana at this point. I didn't have my little girl. Mm-mm. And after the event, I took the bunny and the birds around and let the seniors pet them. But this was like a 4th of July thing, so people were outside having ice cream in their wheelchairs or whatever, and they just spread out after the show. And I walked around the entire gig and let people pet the bunny and just socialize, just hanging out with them. Sometimes they just want to talk to you, you know? And I walked up to this one lady and she says, "A bunny. I haven't seen a bunny in years. My son Billy had a bunny. Billy doesn't live here anymore. He lives in Richmond, Virginia, but he comes to see me about once a month. Man, I miss when he had a bunny. So cute, so cute." And she pet it, and we talked a little bit, and that was it. I walked around, I did a circle, and when I came back in the building, she's right there, and she said, "A bunny. It's been years since I've seen a bunny. My son Billy had a bunny." And I told Natalie, and she said the exact same story, exactly, but she gasped. She wanted to pet the bunny. She wanted to love the bunny. She wanted to hug the bunny. She wanted to rub it against, you know, her cheek or whatever. Do I keep doing it, Natalie? She gets so daggone excited.
And happy, yeah.
Am I torturing her? Am I doing something bad? If I keep going back to her, what do I do? So I think I went over there twice, but I was like, man, I mean, it just made her so happy. I wanted to keep giving her, I don't know.
You created just an unbelievable moments of joy for her. Pet therapy is extremely therapeutic for people with dementia. You really need to tap into all 5 of a person's senses when they have dementia. So the touch of the bunny, the feel of the bunny on her face, the smell of the bunny, the memories that the bunny triggered for her. You couldn't have created a more joyful situation for that woman.
And I'm like, I felt like I was bad if I kept going back to her, but I mean, it was audible. My son Billy had a bunny. Billy lives in Richmond now. And it was all this stuff coming back to her, and she was just so happy. It was like I gave her cash. Yeah.
And you know, she repeated the story, which is a very common behavior, repetitive stories,
verbatim.
Repetitive questions, repetitive behaviors are all very common because the short-term memory is basically short-circuiting during this whole progression of the disease. So she didn't remember that she had told you that story the first time, so she thought she was telling that to you for the first time, but you could just see the happiness that it was creating by her reminiscing about her son with the bunny when he was younger. And the thing that we know is she might not remember for an extended period of time what it actually was that created the moment of joy or the happiness, but the feeling of happiness and joy stays with them actually for a period of time.
Awesome.
She might forget that you were there and had a bunny and she pet the bunny, but that feeling that she experienced by enjoying the bunny and thinking about her son with the bunny, that's going to stay with her. That's going to linger for a while. So.
Wow. Because it was like 4 minutes later, but yeah. So when I left, she might have still had a smile on her face. That's awesome.
You made that woman's day. Trust me. You absolutely made her day.
Aww.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Natalie had a question. We were trying to get some questions for you before this thing started. She said, do you think they'll have a cure or a pause pill in the near future or in the distant future? A pause pill meaning, all right, you got symptoms. Let's stop it here so it doesn't get worse. Do they have anything? Are Are we looking good?
The pause pills that you talk about have been around for about 20 years.
Oh.
And one's Aricept, one's Namenda, there's an Exelon patch. But what they've proven to do for people, and it varies from person to person, is it can help delay the progression of the disease, but once it stops being effective, then it stops being effective, and that varies from person to person. One person can take one of those delay pills and basically just stay where they are at the stage they're at for years. Others, it could be 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 18 months. So everybody has, it works on people. It varies how it works on people. But what we do know is once it stops working, it stops working. And then they typically take kind of a dive in their decline. There's a new medication that was just approved by the FDA that actually has turned out to be kind of controversial because it helps remove the proteins that cause in the brain that cause Alzheimer's, but the catch is you have to administer the medication at the very early onset of the disease. And unfortunately, with Alzheimer's disease, most people aren't even diagnosed with the disease until they're already in their mid-stage because the symptoms are so subtle in the beginning that it's really, really hard to really detect them or differentiate them from just the normal aging forgetfulness that we all experience, like misplacing our keys, things like that. By the time they become really obvious and really have an impact on a person's day-to-day life, they're already in their mid-stages and it's too late for that new medication. So that has been an issue. There are, I know, because I just attended a workshop through the Alzheimer's Association where we talked about, they did a presentation on this very subject. And right now, as we speak, there are over 300 clinical trials taking place on different treatments and management of Alzheimer's disease, but nothing so far has proven to be foolproof and really work to cure or treat. And then the other thing that I'm aware of is there has been stem cell research going on to regenerate the cells of people with Alzheimer's disease for decades, and it's looking promising, but there's nothing right now on the horizon that could even remotely be considered a cure for this disease. And from what the Alzheimer's Association facts and figures have disclosed for this year, 2021, and the World Health Organization, both their findings are telling us that the numbers worldwide will double in the next 25 to 30 years if we don't find a cure for this disease.
But is that also in the regulation of that is because we're living longer too? Doesn't that add a little bit to it?
Well, yes. And because the baby boomer generation is the generation aging now, and the baby boomer population is a huge generation. It's the largest human generation to so far to live, and we're aging, and the oldest baby boomers are in their mid to late 70s now, and this is the reason, part of the reason why the numbers are looking so horrifically significant is because of those two things. We're living longer, and it's a huge generation of people that are falling into that age bracket where they will start to develop the disease.
I have a question. You were saying the early symptoms of Alzheimer's are very hard to sort of, detect. So if if you know you've had it in your family, so say like my mom or dad starts feeling like they can't remember where they put their keys or they can't find different things, am I supposed to encourage them to go to the doctor to get checked out and say, hey, maybe you should go and make sure this isn't something, so that maybe you can get that one of those pause pills or something? Or will they just show up to the doctor and the doctor just kind of, oh no, you're fine, it's just a couple forgetful little things, don't worry about it? And so does that make sense? Is my question making sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. And this is the dilemma that most doctors face is it's only when it reaches a certain, where the progression of the disease reaches a certain point, that they can really kind of differentiate and because there is no test or diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease. They have to go through a process of elimination and kind of a testing process to see what it isn't before they can narrow it down and say, I really think that this is a brain disease that's causing dementia. And the other thing that throws the wrench into the mix is many people suffer from what's called mixed dementia, and they might have 2 or 3 brain diseases going on at the same time that are causing the symptoms. So a person can have Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease exactly at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Or another one, too. That's called mixed dementia. So therein lies the problem is if somebody's behaviors or symptoms are really subtle, it's difficult for even a doctor to be able to determine whether or not there's something more serious than just normal forgetfulness that's going on. So a couple of the things that you can look for anybody to look for is when the symptoms are so obvious that they're really interfering with a person's activities of daily living. And I'll give you a couple examples. So a person with normal aging forgetfulness, and we all experience it at some point of our life, the older we get, we've all misplaced our keys. We've all put our glasses on top of our head and couldn't remember that they were there, and then somebody will say, they're right there on your head.
Yeah.
One of the big differences for somebody with a more serious brain problem than just normal aging is you might misplace your keys. Somebody that has dementia could misplace their keys and then find them and not have a clue what the function of those keys are. They just don't know that this is the tool that you use to put in your ignition and start your car up and then drive someplace.
Yeah, okay.
That's a big difference. You
Right.
don't know what the function of something is. You have trouble. So, of course, Natalie, you and I, we've been making grocery lists for decades. And a lot of times, I don't know what your process is, but my process is I think about what I'm going to fix, and I go to the grocery store, and then I think about, okay, I'm going to make this dish, and these are all the ingredients that go into this dish, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this. Somebody with dementia could not process that. They wouldn't be able to have that complicated of a thought process to go, okay, I'm going to make fried chicken, and these are the ingredients that I need. And I know that I need to buy these ingredients to make this dinner for my family, and you write down what you don't have at home. That's way too complicated of a thought process for a person with cognitive impairment.
Okay.
They would not be able to do that. That's way too complicated. They would have trouble operating even simple appliances that they've been using for a long time, a microwave, not even knowing how to push the buttons or get the coffee maker started. These are all things that affect their activity of daily living.
Record TV shows that they had been recording on their DVR with their remote control for years. They just can't remember how to do it anymore.
Okay.
No, and you lose the ability to task sequence. So what I mean by that is brushing our teeth is a sequence of tasks that just have become second nature to us. We're taught when we're children, and you first pull your toothbrush out of the toothbrush holder, and then you run the water over the toothbrush, and then the next step is to put the toothpaste on, and then you start brushing, and you go through this sequence of tasks. People with dementia can't task sequence anymore. They forget how to do simple things like even brush their hair or put their clothes on right. Like people with dementia, it's not uncommon for them to put their pants over their head. So you lose the ability to perform just everyday tasks because you can't remember what sequence the task goes in. It's not uncommon for a person to, be in the shower and a caregiver helping them with their shower, and they all of a sudden are just absolutely insistent upon getting out. And the caregivers argue and go, "No, we're not finished yet. We're not finished yet." But the person with dementia believes they're finished. They think that they've completed everything that is done in the shower, and they insist on getting out when they really haven't. They still have shampoo in their hair.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that we see that definitely would be noticeable. But in the very early stages, it's a tough call because they are. And then I've talked to so many family members over the year when they finally did get a diagnosis and the loved one is already in the stage, and they start thinking back and they'll say, there were subtle signs in the beginning, but they just didn't seem that serious at the time. They're just
right.
So that's very, very common.
Yeah, but hindsight's always 20/20. You can always look back. We have like 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left. I want to get to your books. You have I don't know how you become a 2-time bestseller, but congratulations.
Yeah.
A 2-time best-selling book called Not All Who Wander Need Be Lost. It's available at Amazon.com. And you have a brand new book. What's the name of the brand new book?
It's called Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's. It's Secret Faces. And the reason I named it that is because there are a lot of secret behaviors and faces to this disease that, like I said earlier, people aren't even aware are part of the disease. So that's kind of what inspired that title. There's a lot of things that people aren't aware of that are part of the disease that actually are part of the disease.
Now, is that also available on Amazon.com?
Yeah.
Awesome. Man, this has been very eye-opening.
Yeah.
I need to get some apps from my phone and start working on it. I didn't realize both my parents had a form of dementia. Anytime my mom acted up, my mom had really bad, she had a triple bypass. They took a vein from her leg, put it in her heart. They gave her pills for that. So everything that my mom had wrong with her, we just got to fix her medication.
Yeah.
You remember that for years after years after years.
Several times.
That's the same thing they did to my dad. He's hallucinating. It's his pills. So, wow, it's very eye-opening. Thank you. Golly. Now I got to talk to my brother and my sister and tell them, be on the lookout.
Yeah.
Yes. And just do whatever you can and implement it in your lifestyle today, because whatever you can do to lower those risk factors, you will lower your chances of developing it later on. And you've seen what this does to people.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
It's not an easy life for anybody, not for the family members, not for caregivers, and not for the people who suffer from these diseases. It's bad.
We have 2 minutes left. I know in your bio you have counterintuitive solutions to help somebody. Can you give us one tip real quick before we run out of time?
Yes.
Counterintuitive. Go for it.
Counterintuitive. Okay. If somebody is having a false belief, and I'll use the one that's very common, somebody with dementia believes their deceased spouse is still alive. You want to do what we call join their reality. In other words, don't correct them. Don't try to steer them back into your reality, because their reality in their mind for that given period of time that they're believing this you can't do anything, you can't say anything, you can't do anything to change that reality. You can cause a catastrophic reaction if you were to tell that loved one, oh, Mom, don't you remember Dad died 5 years ago? She doesn't believe that. It could be like she's hearing that for the first time and go into an absolute panic.
Yeah.
So, but that's a counterintuitive response. Our gut reaction, our instinctive reaction is to try to make them better. You want your parent to be normal again, so you try to correct them and you try to steer them back into what's real to you.
Yep, no one ever think of that. We are running out of time. It's going to cut us off. Wow, I have learned so much today. We're running out of time. Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been very informative for all of us. The best-selling book, Not All Who Wonder Need Be Lost, on Amazon. The new book, what's the title of the new book again?
Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's. It's Secret Faces.
And that's also on Amazon.com. And you have a blog on Facebook with the first title, Not All Who Wonder Need Be Lost?
Yes.
And is it all blog entries, or is it?
It's a lot of tips, tools, best practices, and information to help family members cope with this disease a little easier.
Golly, I wish I had that when Mom was going through her stuff. But we didn't know she had Lewy body till after it was all over with. So
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been awesome. You're awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for taking the time to chat about this, both Natalie and Wes, and thanks again for having me on. It was an honor, and I really appreciate it.
No problem. We have a couple plugs real quick. Stay on the line. I'll talk to you in 1 second. Our television show, Wes Iseli's Magiclife, has been picked up by Golden Media Syndication, and they're now selling our show across the country. So check your local listings to see if we're in your area. If not, ask your local cable provider, and hopefully we will be soon. Also, check out wesisley.com for our show merch. That's logo t-shirts, my TV podcast t-shirts, Magic Man hats, stickers, playing cards, and more. See you next week. Check us out online at wesisley.com and patreon.com/Wes_Isley for behind-the-scenes videos, blooper videos, never-before-seen footage, discounts on merchandise, magic trick tutorials, and more. That's Wes Iseli, spelled Wesiseli.